Welcome, everyone, to Winning the Virtual Room, our June Business as Unusual webinar. We're really excited to have a very interactive and engaging session. I've been working on not using all my crutch words today, so Rob's going to be helping all of us improve.
We'll see how you do, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how I do. Rob will help us all improve how we excel in online presentations. We have our co-host, Tom Latteray, that just popped in. So we're really excited to have him today. Just a couple housekeeping things as we get started. If you have questions, please populate them into the chat. And then Dana Walters will be moderating our live stream on LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you've got questions in those channels, please, add them to the chat there and she will populate them so we can answer questions ongoing. We're happy to have everybody join us today, and we're going to get started because we've got a lot of content to cover. So going to just introduce my co-host today. So it's Tom Latteray, and he is my really good friend, one of the greatest humans I know. And he's also the managing partner at M3 Learning. M3 works with companies as large as Google and WebEx to small organizations like our entrepreneurial startups. Their solutions change the way your sales teams will interact with their accounts. The relationships will be at higher levels, deeper, stronger, and way more collaborative. The tools that they use transform the way your team communicates at every level on the account and will give you a framework to effectively engage, qualify, and close more business, which is helpful to all of us. Tom has been a disciple of M3 Learning process since 2000, when he was the VP of Sales and Marketing at SBR Inc. With over 26 years of marketing, sales, and sales management experience, Tom is able to really bring a unique perspective to the M3 Learning experience because he's not only teaching people to do it, he lives it. And then our fabulous guest today, we're really excited to welcome Rob Johnson. Many people in the Chicago market will recognize Rob. Rob's president of Rob Johnson Communications. Clever name, Rob.
And yes.
He's a TV journalist.
Spent a lot of time working on that.
Yes. Well, I know a good branding organization so if you need some help. So, but he's been a TV journalist for more than 25 years. He's been working as an anchor and a reporter. And the last 20 plus years were spent in the Chicago market, as I mentioned, where he built trustworthy, credible, and high integrity brand. Now Rob's really taken his TV skills and experience to multiple charitable boards where he serves. And then he's also using it to help support business and business professionals manage their public relations challenges. He works with C-suite executives to help them best lead their companies through media training, messaging strategy, and navigating through crises when they arise. We've had no crises in the last few years. He's also assisting clients with image building, marketing, and branded, as well as COVID-related issues. He helps these leaders build internal and external communications and virtual presentation training, which he is sort of taking a break from today to join us. And so I'm going to start with Tom. Tom, tell us what's not on your bio. Tell the audience some unique fact about yourself to get us kicked off. All right, it looks like Tom might be frozen. So Rob, we'll go to you for that question.
So I appreciate you giving everybody the background on what I do. I am a father of a 17-year-old. My wife Stacy and I spend a lot of time following him around. He is getting ready to be a junior hockey player, 17-year-old playing in junior hockey up in Wisconsin. And so we spend a lot of time helping him achieve his goals and dreams. And so we spend a lot of time on the road doing that. And so when we can go on a family vacation, we're like, hey, a family vacation at the beach, no hockey. So we're a big hockey family, and it's very big part of our life. And having a flexible schedule now, doing my own consulting, helps me be able to peel away and go travel here or there and watch him pursue his dreams.
Well, I'm an avid fan of travel and hockey, so love both of those activities. Tom, are you back with us? Can you share? Looks like Tom is having some technical difficulties, so we're going to just jump in. And so the one thing that we always like to start with is really just centering on why we're doing the business unusual webinars, and that is to help people see the different growth lane opportunities that they have for their business, and being able to present and communicate effectively is critically important no matter what growth path an organization chooses. So let's sort of jump into the meat of your presentation. Parker, if you can go to the next slide. And so Rob, let's start off. In life, they say first impressions are everything. Can you kind of take us through that and tell us why?
Well, it sounds like a cliche, and probably in certain circles it is. But I would say that it is very important for you as you're making your first impression this way. What is authentic to you? What is your key? What's the most important thing that you're doing? And I would say that everybody has their look, right? So I wanted to give you an idea as we're sitting here looking at all of these different folks. What is relevant for the audience? I realize probably today I'm a little overdressed. I'm actually doing a media training today at McCormick Place in Chicago with an organization, and so this was the look I had to have today. So this is authentic to me, but it might be, I might wear, depending on who it is, I might wear a hoodie one day, or I might wear a sports shirt, or whatever the case is. So I'm giving you lots of options that you can look around. And some people are like, hey, it's pretty informal. So we want to make sure that you look the way you do, relevant to the meeting that you're in. If people are dressed up, then you probably need to be more dressed up like this. If people are more casual, business casual, or just strictly casual, you need to do that. The flannel shirt, a lot of people working remotely, employ that. So that's my best advice for everybody that's thinking about that.
Yes. Well, I think too, the work attire has really drastically changed, with most people concentrating on what they're wearing in the very top half of their body, and less, like the fact that I'm not even wearing shoes right now. So it is, just a different world in terms of how we come to be present in most of our work life experiences today. So Tom, welcome back. Are you
I think I'm okay. We were having some technical problems, and so I think we're okay now.
Excellent. So why don't you take the next question for Rob?
Yeah. So, Rob, I think, you're talking about first impressions. Why is that so important when you're connecting with the folks that you're talking to? Why does that create such an important piece of where you need to start?
That's a great question, and it's going to help me bridge to the next thing that we're going to talk about here, which is the way you look is because we're virtual. I mean, we can only see each other from the chest up or the neck up. So you're missing a lot of things going on in the room, right? You're missing body language. You're missing walking in a room and shaking a hand and how are you and that sort of thing. This is how we do it. So what do you do that can make a difference? And these are all things that when you add them all up, they have real value, but they're all smaller things. And today you're going to hear me repeat some things, and you might say to yourself, gosh, he's being repetitive. I'm being repetitive by design because I want to drill this point home to you. And here's the point I also want to drill home to you as it relates to not just how you look in terms of how we all look in this little box that we're in right here, but what you say. And I love this piece right here because content for a meeting, for a presentation, for whatever it is, if you're a sales team, if you're an executive, it doesn't matter. Content is the most important thing that you can think of in terms of how am I going to pitch this business? How am I going to get a sale? How am I going to further my cause? So when you see this pie graph, I don't want you to think for a second that I'm saying content's not important. What I am saying is Content is very important. It's probably going to win you the business or lose you the business. But your voice and your persona, how you connect with people, is going to really win the day. And because you're not in the room, because you can't read the body language, because you can't reach out and shake a hand, you have to make sure that you're doing everything you can on this end to be engaging. So I'm a fast talker. I'm a hands talker. I'm hoping it's not too distracting. I'm not waving them everywhere, doing that sort of thing, but I'm doing what's authentic to me right now, which is presenting in the way that I present and the voice that I use, and also doing some things that would be nonverbal that are helping loosen me up. For instance, the hands. This is authentic to me, but it's not authentic to everybody. You may be somebody who wants to keep your hands on the table. You're comfortable doing that. You may want to keep them down at your side, whatever the case is. There's not one right way to do it, but your voice, your persona, the way you connect with people, the way you're looking into this little camera right here, that's what's going to help. And so I love talking about this piece because people go, what? You're saying my content's not important? And I'm saying, no, your content's very important. But the way you connect is with your voice, with your persona, is going to win the day for you, no matter what your objective is that particular day.
Rob, if I could just add something, we work with a lot of inside sales teams, and we know groups that will, before they get on a big call, they'll do a bunch of push-ups, or they'll stand up, they'll walk, they'll do something that creates an impact that they know is going to get over the phone or over the Zoom call, whatever that is. Is there anything you do? Is there anything you do to kind of?
Well, that's later in the presentation, where I kind of at the end, I like to talk about it. We can talk about it now, and then I'll kind of share it with you again. So today I woke up early. I knew I had to be down here, and I worked out. So for me, it's a workout. So for other people, it might be I need 2 cups of coffee. I can't function unless I have 2 cups of coffee. Or it might be I need 8 hours of sleep. If I don't get 8 hours of sleep, I am useless. So everybody has something, so working out, some people would say yoga. I do meditation from time to time. It really helps me out.
Yeah.
It helps center me. It helps calm my mind. It helps keep me focused. If I'm dragging a little bit, in lieu of caffeine, I might meditate for 20 minutes. And I come out and I'm like, okay, I feel good. So everybody has their thing. There's not one right way to do it, but whatever your thing is, make sure that you employ it. Sleep, workout, caffeine, meditation, you name it. And I'm not saying drink 12 cups of coffee, because it's funny in some of these presentations, trainings that I do, and it'll say, don't drink caffeine. And I'm like, well, if you drink it and it gets you awake, that's fine. I don't need you to have 12 cups of coffee where you're wired.
Right. So I love that I think when I give a presentation, I'm very focused on the content. And I'm glad you clarified sort of that balance of how you show up, your voice and persona, as well as that attention to the content. What are some of the other key elements for delivering an effective communication?
Well, let's kind of talk about this, and as we advance the slide here, I think it'll really help people understand kind of where we're talking about. I think the other things we need to be talking about here are coming up with your messaging. So you're doing a presentation. We've already talked about what you're doing before to get ready. We're talking about how you should look. And then you need to really hone in on what is your clear but differentiated message. So this boils down to a few simple things. And I just did this an hour ago with the group I was doing media training for. And I said, like I always do, people say, this is it. This is not it. But this is the start. And the start is, if you can't answer these very simple questions about what you do, who you do it for, why you do it, your passion, and what's your value proposition, why are you better in your sector? If that comes up, that's the least of the important questions as we kind of get going. And what it does is it will tee up a 15 to 20 to 30 second elevator pitch that will help you, who are you? What do you do? Who do you do it for? Why are you better? And if you can answer those 4 questions in 15 to 20 to 30 seconds total, it's gonna set you on the right path. That doesn't mean a woman we just worked with did a beautiful 15 to 20 seconds And then she started getting into something else, and it was like, stop right there. You had it. It was your central message. It was your pitch. You made a great point. Stop. And if the conversation's good enough, and it will be, if you're focused and you know what your message is, you know what your objective is when you're in that meeting, it's going to elicit follow-up questions.
Yeah, we've even seen that helping your full team, sort of people that you might not think of in terms of conveying your brand message, giving those teammates, a elevator pitch so that they can, at a cocktail party, or if you're asking them to do a networking event, be able to communicate that value proposition that you offer as well.
And it's perfect that you mentioned both those things, because an elevator pitch, people are like, I hardly am ever on an elevator. It is not literal. It is proverbial, and it is the cocktail party. It is the seminar. It is the, where you're pitching yourself and what you do. It may have to be in this regard right here, where you have to do it, and it's a little bit more separated, because we're not all in the same room together. So I think you brought up some great points there, because that's exactly what it's meant to do. And it's meant to be the appetizer for the whole conversation. It's not meant to be the whole meal. You're not eating the entree and the dessert and the first, what do you do? Who are you? Don't give them chapter and verse. They don't want to know chapter and verse. Give us the most important parts of what you do. A woman that I just worked with, I like to reference that because it's fresh in my mind, was very passionate about children. And that was evident in her first 15 to 20 seconds. And then when she started getting into the other stuff, it was like, nope, stop right there. You did great. You have to know what those messages are. You have to know that this is just the beginning of the conversation.
So what are some of the other things that help your story come to life?
Yeah, let's take a look at the next slide, and this is a good way to kind of get into it and talk about things that we need to. First of all, you want to make them focus on you. So that's, if you have the stage, as it were, if I'm sitting here talking, clearly it's going to be on me. There's no other distractions around me, I don't think. So you want to be the central focus of this presentation, so that everybody is paying attention and everybody is engaged in what you're doing. So that's one important factor. And there's a few other things that I want to talk about as well. If we can take a look at some of the other things when it comes to knowing your audience, this is very important. So you're not always going to be giving the same presentation to the same people over and over and over again. Maybe there's a sales pitch, maybe you're doing it frequently, that's one thing. But you have to know your audience. Who is your audience? Where are they? And what matters to them about your story? And then telling a story, crafting anecdotes to support what your story is and why it's meaningful to your audience. And I always like to use this technique, and sometimes it's not always a story, a stat, and a soundbite. That's in a perfect world, that's the tidiest way to do it. But it could be just a story. So recently I was working with some doctors, and they were talking about diagnosing someone. Somebody came in with something, and because of their technology and everything, they were able to diagnose something serious like a brain tumor. And the point was, you need to go in and see your doctor. And people go, yeah, right. And by telling that story, she illustrated exactly what you need to be doing. If you have a story around your pitch, it's relatable, it's meaningful, and I think that it's very important to let people know about. So that's why I would always say, and especially as you're getting into it, it's like, okay, Rob, the floor is yours. And I start telling you about what I do and why it's important and who it helps. But if I can tell a story around it, if I can tell you the story about the doctor that employed this thing in the right way, or I can tell you about the other woman. So what I'm doing is I'm telling you stories. I'm not saying, oh, stop, let me first tell a story. I'm just telling one. I just told you two. It wasn't the be all end all. It wasn't the greatest thing ever, but it teed up the rest of the conversation. And the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be. And there's nothing that gives me greater joy as I work with executives to see them not employ this. And then we go through some training, some concepts, and then we'll come back, and there may be a real interview that's going on with somebody, or there'll be a real presentation that's going on, and they'll try the story. Hey, I had a CEO recently talk about family, like their 500 employees felt like family. Then she told a 20 or 30-second story about her own family to make her point. And I'm like, that works. Knowing your audience, knowing what's important to them, very important. And the telling the story thing is key for me.
Well, Rob, I think it's so critical. I mean, great speakers figure out ways to almost speak to every single person in the audience, even if there's 500 people in that room. So that's the successful side of it. But we all have been in those presentations where, the speaker is a lot of ums and ums, and they're telling you how nervous they are. And maybe they're reading every word on the slide. And you're like, oh, come on. And they're not, what are some tips that you would give for folks to really create a wow factor and make sure they're connecting and resonating with their audience?
Well, this slide is actually a good example. I submitted it to everybody at Red Caffeine a while back, and now in retrospect, I wish there was less words on it. So you're right. You don't have to read every word on there. You can use it as a reference point. I could probably condense this to, audiences, who, where, what matters to them. So if you're condensing it, and all it's meant for in terms of a presentation is a guide, to guide you there, to give you as the presenter, if I see something up on the screen, I know exactly where I want to go.
Well, I noticed really, even in your case, you didn't read every one of these words. You just picked one or two words and you talked about it. I thought that was really powerful.
Well, so if I had to do it again, I'd have even less words, Tom. But you're right. I'm using it as a reference point so people can say, oh, I'm following along. Okay, that's fine. So it's used as a reference point. It's also meant to guide you, like, okay, here's what I want to say. If I have these three things, I know kind of where I want to go. So it's really meant to guide you, but to have you know enough about your subject matter that you have the confidence to go from slide to slide, from topic to topic, to your various pieces of content, and know that it's making sense to people, and know that it's congruent, and knowing that you're sort of pointed in the right direction. That's what these are meant to do. They're not meant to be chapter and verse on everything.
Yeah. Any other techniques that you use to really put the wow factor in your presentations? What other tips or techniques could you give us for that?
Well, I would say that first of all, it's virtual. So and as we go through some of these slides, let's go to the next one if we could, and take a look at this. So we did story, stat, soundbite. Let's kind of continue with that and kind of move through that, because I think we've already visited that enough. So I was giving you an example about a company, and it's just telling the story. And then if it's something that, as I was sitting here, I came up with company X that offers customized financial products and services to our clients. And then I have some verbiage here that it's fill in the blanks to what's important to you. Then the stat might be the next slide, and it would have to be something really impressive. This one happens to be 96% of shares are held by employees. That's a really impressive number. You don't want to say, hey, 53% of da 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 da, because you're like, well, that's barely over, that's barely a majority. But something like this that drives your point home. 96% of our shares held by employees, great one. And then at the end, like a little soundbite, a little something to leave you with, like nothing's more important than our clients, our communities, and our culture at Company X. So it's something where you're like, oh gosh, that's good. So I think that these are effective, the story, stat, soundbite, as I mentioned earlier, an effective technique. And if you use I did mention it as sort of just, hey, tell a story. And then if you're somebody that wants to connect, and you can do this in 30 seconds, you can do this in 30 seconds. And so some of the best practices that I see, and we're talking about virtually today, but there's also some good things that you can do as well to make sure that when you're going into a boardroom, that you are prepared to present. Boardroom style meetings, obviously you want to make sure that all your content is that everybody knows who's doing what you're doing, that sort of thing, that you're well aligned. And this is where people fall short during virtual presentations. So a boardroom style meeting, make sure you have your content. It's a maybe 1 or 2 dozen people in there, right?
Yeah.
So you want to command the audience, and you want to make sure that your team, let's say it's a sales presentation, is aligned, and that before you've gone in that boardroom, you said, all right, you're doing this, you're doing that, and you say this, which is pretty commonplace. So I'm not saying anything to anybody on this webinar that they're like, wow, I didn't know that. Of course you know that. Where I have found that people have fallen short as it relates to the virtual boardroom, when you're making the virtual presentation, people will say, we always met right outside the boardroom for 5-10 minutes and we choreographed it. And then somebody will say, and then I'll ask people, when you're in the virtual meeting, they say, oh, it was terrible. Nobody knew what was coming next. There was an awkward pause. We didn't know what was going on. And I would say, and again, I don't think this is terribly insightful, but it's more insightful than you might think. Did you get on Zoom half an hour before, 20 minutes before, and choreograph what everybody was going to do? Oh, no, we didn't have time. We have all these meetings set up all day. We didn't have time to do it. You were doing a presentation that you were going to do in whether it's a boardroom or it's a virtual boardroom, and you weren't ready to know who was next and who was saying what, and you'd be surprised. So what I'm suggesting to you all, as we talk about boardroom style meetings, and as they relate to this particular topic of the virtual boardroom, the virtual meeting, is the preparation still has to be there, because nobody's going to say, hey, I'm going to walk into a presentation and not prepare. Of course you are. You must prepare. You must choreograph it. And because you're not all in the same room, because we're all seeing each other in this fashion today, you need to take time to have that extra meeting, that extra engagement, to make sure that everybody is aligned.
So, Rob, I have a follow-on question around that. I think a lot of times it's referred to as like an ensemble presentation. How do you sort of determine who will take what role, and sort of coach people around taking those I statements out of their conversations, or how people get introduced? What are some tips for the boardroom in preparation that you could share with our guests today?
Yeah, it's this could be any meeting, but certainly for this particular subject, it's the I and the me. You want to minimize that because you're selling the services of you all, of we. And so I would be very mindful of the words that I choose to use, because I and me are not going to play when you're part of a team that is selling whatever you're selling, or if you're an executive and you're trying to point out the virtues of your firm. And so I think these things are all very important when it comes to that.
So there's some other scenarios that you're going to take us through too.
Yeah.
So board meetings.
So presenting to large groups, and this is sometimes difficult because it's a large group. Let's say it's 50-ish or more. Getting everybody focused is key. Everybody will quiet down. And so we're talking about the actual large group in person, and then we'll talk about the actual large group as we're going on virtually. You want to make sure that you have the command of the room, that they're focused on you. I showed that graphic a little bit earlier, that they're focused on you, that they can see what you have to offer, and that you're engaging them. So sometimes the hard part, and it's certainly hard today. I mean, I'm engaging with you too, but I know there are other people on here, but because it's a webinar, I can't see anybody or hear anybody. I know we're going to get questions and chats coming in, and I can see some of them on the side here, but you want to be engaging them, the large groups. Not that you don't want to engage a boardroom or this or that, but just remember that having your team aligned, whether it's a boardroom, whether it's a large group, making sure that you have your presentation down, making sure that everything in the room works. It may be, today we were in our media training, and we had the technical guy in here because we were having trouble with our deck beforehand. You need to absolutely make sure, if there's a presentation where people are going to be seeing it on a big screen or something of that nature, that everything works. And I know people are like, come on, we joined this today to hear this. I just had it happen. And it happens all the time. And you get into an environment where you're not used to it, whether it be a boardroom, which I'm in today, whether it's a large group, and you must know your technology. You must know where to plug it in. Where's the Wi-Fi? Where's the code? How do I get this thing to work? How do I have my Cat 6 plugged in so it's on the big screen now? Do I need to run through it? Whether it's virtual or whether it's, and that's why I'm trying to bring up these things that you would do presenting to large groups, whether it be virtual in person presenting to boardrooms, whether it be virtual in person, because they're relevant to what we're talking about. And you must absolutely go through that process and make sure that everything works. Because when I walked into this today, this boardroom, it didn't work. And we had to sit around and spend some time and okay, the audio is good. Okay, now the connection's bad. Oh, I can't move my Microsoft Teams thing the way I want to get it in slide mode or whatever the case is. You absolutely have to make sure your team is aligned, that everybody understands what their role is, so you're not talking over each other, and that you make sure that your technology is there so that you're going to be the center of attention in front of this large group. And as I mentioned earlier, engaging people. Sometimes it's a Q&A session. Something like for us right now, I don't want people to wait till the end to ask questions, even though I know we have spent some time, we'll have time on the back end to do that. I want to make sure that I'm talking about, what I'm talking about is relevant to you all, Tom and Kathy, because you're the co-hosts, and I want this to be a conversation. And sometimes it's hard in a large group to have it be that way. So you can't rely on that as much, because you don't want 50 people to chime in. But if you can do it in an orderly fashion, that's going to really help you out.
Rob, we've seen a lot of success with companies when they use polls, for example, or breakout rooms or chats, chat questions. Are there things that you've seen that are successful in this?
I like the chat because I can see it here on the side, and you're going to decide, hey, which ones of these are we going to bring up? But it's nice to see, because it helps to see what people care about. Yeah. And in terms of engagement, Tom, like a poll or something, kind of when you first start off, who are you? What are you? It kind of gives you a little bit better demographic information or just an information about what's important to people. So on various webinars I've done, it wasn't really relevant to today because we had a specific thing we were talking about. But if I were to do a webinar where I want to get some information about who's who, about what's important, and then to engage people initially, I think something like the poll works out really well. And I've had great success with it in the past in terms of an initial engagement thing to get people, hey, I voted B on something, and let's see where my vote came in. Oh, I'm 22%, or whatever the case is. But it helps engage people.
Rob, we did get a great question that I feel like is relevant to this larger group topic. It's about using sort of this PowerPoint features where you can actually see your notes on a particular slide. Do you have a thought or opinion on using those types of features?
So you're talking about presenting, like, say, to a large group, and we're in a big room, but your notes are popping up on the side. Is that what we're talking about, Kathy?
Right. So in terms of, there's a way to view in presentation mode where you can see your notes on your slide deck, or you're really just seeing the slide itself.
Okay, if I'm being perfectly honest, and I've used my notes and that sort of thing, I would prefer that you were in presentation mode, so it's full screen and not seeing the notes, because I don't want everybody to know how the sausage was made, honestly. And that's kind of what it is. But if you needed something up on stage with you, or notes in front of you where you're not distracting people by looking down, maybe you have some bullets so you know what's next. I would prefer that to, I get to see your notes, because if I'm sitting here presenting, anything else that's on the screen is going to be a distraction. So I want you to focus on me. And if I have notes, or if I have little, like, oh, the tabs at the top, I can see the tabs at the top. I wonder what they were on before. Oh, they were on this. And then I'm not paying attention to you. And so you've lost the room. So my note on that would be, and I saw that question pop up too, is for a PowerPoint, I would prefer you to have your own notes in front of you. And I don't want you to have a script. I want you to have bullet points, notes, whatever that helps you know what's next, what's coming next. And so I would recommend that, as opposed to showing your notes, because I don't want everybody to know what went on behind the scenes before I did this.
Yeah,
I do feel like he was asking a question where the notes would be hidden to everyone, but the presenter.
Oh gosh. Okay. So if you're talking about that, if you have notes and you're really relying on them, I would prefer your notes to be, and what I tell people sometimes, for notes, if I'm doing a virtual presentation like I'm doing here, If you're up on stage, if you have little cards or this or that, that's fine. If we're doing it like this, and I see people that have their notes, I'll see people doing presentations and they're looking over here and they're looking over here because that's where their notes are. They're looking down here, down here. I'm like, why don't you just do like a Google Doc where you can advance it and you can stay right near the camera, and you can have your notes right there. Because quite frankly, it's fine to see everything. And if I put a note up there, and if I couldn't see you guys all the time for this presentation, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Because once you get into it, once you've tried to read the body language, once you've reached out to people, once you've tried to connect with them virtually, and you're in your presentation mode, I hope I'm answering that question right now. So I know I went.
Right.
So I would suggest, because I've done it and I've had executives do it that I coach, like just keep it right here. But don't give me Post-it notes all over where they're here and they're there and they're there and they're there, because that doesn't look good.
Yeah.
But if you can keep them in front of you, and then you can scroll down, you can control it. You can keep those notes right near eye level, right where you're looking at the camera. So there's not going to be much eye creep at all.
I completely agree. And to me, in terms of large groups, when I have actually tried to use notes, and what I find is that the way I write and the way I speak in more conversational settings is quite different. So I get really tripped up if I am trying to be verbatim to how I would have liked to have come across when I'm presenting. So maybe a few bullet points, but never like full on, everything I want to say on a particular slide, or I get too caught up in trying to be perfect in terms of the articulation. And the one other thing, Rob, that I love doing when I'm doing like a larger group setting is be at the room when people are walking in, be at the door, and getting a few conversation starters going, like, why are you attending? Is there anything important that you wanted me to cover today, so that you have a little insight into what the audience is hoping for, so you get that opportunity to address those things right away versus wait for a question to be asked.
That's a terrific point, because if you're doing a small group, then you can kind of figure out who's there and in advance and know what's going to be important to them. But engaging them, and whether it's a Q&A or a chat on a virtual presentation, or whether it's just taking somebody's temperature, like, what's important to you? You walk in to a training or to a presentation, and you're going to have specific goals in mind. But like for the thing that I'm doing today, which is media training, all these people come at it from a little bit, they're all part of the same organization, but they have different audiences. So, hey, what's important to you? Who's your most important audience? Or I'll ask the other person in the room or various other people, who's your audience? Getting to know them in that way and making them feel welcome into what you're doing is key. But it also helps, and this is the difference between virtual and in person. It's so much better to be able to go up, shake a hand, read body language, and learn a little bit about somebody, because when we all got on here, you don't get that opportunity as much, which is why when you have the opportunity, as you're waiting for people to come into the room, that's akin to the live, hey, we walked in the room, we shook hands, how you doing? We're waiting for everybody. So we're waiting for everybody to join. That's your time to be like, oh, Kathy, your child plays softball and you were in, Kankakee this weekend. So tell and because I might be able to use that later in the presentation as not as a full-blown story, but as a reference point. And for you, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, they were listening. That's very important in terms of getting information about people, knowing what's important to them, knowing that audience, and also just connecting on an interpersonal level.
So I know we've touched a little bit on those remote experiences, but we did get another question about kind of prepping and knowing your audience. Is there any way to do that virtually? Is there?
Great question too. Yeah. How do you do that virtually? How do you get that engagement before a session?
Before a session, well, I mean, if you're meeting with them, if it's a potential client and you're having meetings, and we're going to present on Thursday at noon, the chances are you've met with them before. Yeah. So you have a chance to connect with them in those other meetings. Like, okay, what do you want? Because whenever I deal with clients, before they're clients, they're potential clients. And so I have to have meetings in advance, and I have to be asking questions. You're going to be asking questions anyway, because of what are the needs of your particular company. But you're also going to be having opportunities in a less formal environment where you're going to be able to ask them questions about, hey, what'd you do this weekend, or this or that, where you're getting to know them. And so because you can't get to know people as well on this as you can in person, I think it's very important having those meetings that are leading up, that they're meaningful, that you're getting to know each other, that you're hearing not only what their needs are, but what kind of makes them tick. That helps. And then once you get into the day of meeting, the actual presentation, as it were, if that's what we're talking about, that's why I just mentioned a second ago, people are coming into the room. Hey, the meeting starts at noon, but somebody's going to roll in. Let's wait for everybody for 2-3 minutes. And if I've already met you, Kathy, we met on some other occasions. So Kathy, how did the softball go in Kankakee this weekend? Or so we might just be sharing things, and it kind of loosens things up a little bit. It kind of takes a less formal approach to this, which is, even though people aren't probably dressed to the nines all the time, it's hard to connect this way. So you need to find every opportunity you can to connect, to make sure that you're talking about what's important to them, and that you're hearing them not only about business, but about some of the other things, because those are connection points that can matter. So this connection, Tom, starts before the meeting, in preparation meetings, where you may have 2 or 3 people on the meeting, all told. And then as you get into your team doing the work, and then it's a presentation to a bigger group, then it's, oh, hey, I want you to meet Jennifer. She's the CFO or whatever. Oh, tonight, So so during that time before it's, hey, it's the presentation, that's when you have those opportunities to do that.
Yeah, we've seen good success with pre-programmed surveys, pre-programmed polls that then populate your first 1 or 2 slides. And so, Rob, I'm definitely hearing a lot about preparation. I think that's critical. In order for you to have a great presentation, it's really about the preparation you do ahead of time. So now you're in the presentation and somebody asks a question. Maybe it's a little bit of a right turn. Maybe it's a complete left turn. Who knows? Any tips on how you kind of get agile? What are the things you can do to prepare yourself for?
Let's advance the slide and talk about that very specific thing. This is something that we don't need to get into as much. We kind of organize this, sequentially.
Next slide.
Yeah, there you go.
So here we go. So we've talked about some, and I'm going to actually go back to the virtual, the what you need to do to present virtually. But let's talk about techniques for answering questions. So you have hooking, bridging, flagging, and compare and contrast. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on hooking, because that requires a follow-up question, even though I know we have it in here. So we're probably going to zip through that a little bit. But bridging, this is a perfect example of what you're talking about, Tom, where somebody asks you a question there. So when you walk into a meeting, a presentation, whatever the case may be, you need to know what your central message is. You need to know why you're there today. For this audience, at this moment, right now, what do I need to be talking about? And I would say the bridge helps you do that. So somebody asks you a question, always answer it. If it's not a winner for you, then you answer a question briefly, but then you bridge it back to what you want to talk about, which, you'll say, and I'll give some techniques here in a second, but bridging is very important because it allows you to take something that you can answer a question. It may be not something you want to spend a lot of time on because it's not going to help you in that particular day, but it helps you get back to your messages. And let's advance this and go through this. So hooking, I said I didn't want to spend any time. Let's jump to bridging here, because hooking requires somebody asking a question. So the idea of bridging is moving deftly from one issue to another. So you would answer the question, and then you would move on to your message. And I think you see politicians do this all the time, but they do it horribly. I could say, "Hey, Tom, is the sky blue? Is the sky blue today?" And you'd say, "Well, I'm here to talk about da, 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 da," and they don't even pretend to answer your question.
Right.
And here would be a kind of it's a little bit of a silly example, but it's an example. And you could say, "Yes, Rob, the sky is blue," and that reminds me, Or, in addition, and you get back to whatever your message is. You go to where you want to go. You acknowledge a question. You heard them, so you respected them. And then, yes, Rob, the sky is blue. And speaking of blue, who knows? You could transition to it in a multitude of ways, but it's the bridge to where you want to go. And it's not spending time with something that may not be a winner for you or an area you don't want to go. So that's bridging. Flagging, if we can take a look at that is a little bit different scenario. Flagging, it helps your audience remember your most important message. So you may be in an interview, you may be getting somebody maybe asking you questions in a presentation about certain things, and you want to remind them of what your central message is. So I'm not here today to tell people what their central messages are. When you go before an audience, I'm just here to prepare you for when you do. Yeah. So the flagging is, at various points in the interview, you can drive that point home again. You can find a moment where you can get back to what you want to talk about. And then, and you can see some examples. The most important thing about our marketing strategy is, or here's what we believe in, and it goes back to your central message. And then sometimes somebody may say, hey, any final thoughts? It could be in a presentation, it could be in an interview, it could be in a boardroom or a large group, whatever the case is. Sometimes they give you that opportunity. Hey, great presentation today, Kathy. Any final points that you'd like to make? Oh my gosh, your eyes, after they get really big, because that's a gift. The last part of the flagging is like, you're planting a flag. The last time, any final thoughts? Or if you just take the opportunity to make the final point, it's like going to midfield. You got two hands on your flag and you're planting it right at midfield. And it's like, that's us. That's who we are. And that's the final word. And I got the final word. And that's it. And that's what I'm leaving people with so they don't forget it. Flagging is very important. Compare and contrast is, and I was working with a insurance company recently. And so if we can go to compare and contrast, is this, everybody understands what that is. It's taking one thing and saying how yours is better. I don't like people to talk about the competition. I don't want you to say, name another company. They do it wrong and we do it right. You could say at other companies or the competition or somebody, so don't name them, don't talk about them. But this is a way for you to make a differentiating point by talking about what somebody does that may not be right or may not be as technologically sound or whatever the case is, and talk about what you're doing that's right. And so compare and contrast, it's a pretty simple concept, but it requires that you don't go trashing the other guys, that you can mention, hey, here's how some people do it, and here's how we do it, and we think we have a better way. So these are all good, they're good interview techniques, they're good presentation techniques, because invariably somebody's going to ask you a question, whether they intended to do it or not. They're going to ask you a question that may not be a winner for you. That's a bridge. A flag is, let's keep reminding them, and then give them a big capital R reminder at the end. And then compare and contrast is, depending on what you're selling, here's how some people do it, here's how we do it, and we think it's better.
What I love about that too is, you're never going to win an argument in front of a large room. So everything you've talked about is that space of agreement, and there's a mutual place. Yes, I love it, but you're still planting that flag, and I love that. That's really good.
Yeah, very, very important.
So when you go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, yeah, please go ahead and ask.
When you go to plant your flag, I think the last slide, we've really got this, and it's a powerful one, is, what's the flag you'd plant as far as preparation? What should everybody do to prepare for their presentation?
Well, I think what you need to do, if we're talking about planting the flag or anything else, Tom, is making sure that you have prepared and you know exactly what your purpose is in that meeting on that day. And like I said earlier, sometimes you're going to have different audiences. Sometimes you're going to have different objectives. You're going to have different goals. But you have to really think in a very thoughtful way what you're going to do to make sure that you're getting in and that you're making those things understandable. And if I could, and I know that we zipped by the virtual slide a little earlier, but I don't. Yeah. So we're going to go to gaining that. So right there, connecting when presenting remotely. It all starts with preparation. We all know that. coming up with your central message. But then there's some technical things that I mentioned earlier too, like knowing your technology, knowing how things work on the computer for the virtual presentation, much as us getting on 15, 20 minutes before and kind of going through it and making sure it works. So for me, it's cameras just about at eye level today. I'm not saying the lighting is perfect because I'm in kind of a foreign area and I'm doing media trainings all day. But if I had to do anything right now, I would probably put a light over here, there, right there. Put a light over there to bounce it off me a little bit better. When we were first setting up, I had a little bit more distracting background, and I just tried to make innocuous pictures the background. So you don't want backlighting, that make you look like a silhouette. You also don't want your blinds to be open, and all of a sudden I can see cars driving by, or I can see people walking to a parking lot or something like that. You want them to be focused on you. And also what I did today was, and I don't do it for every one of my presentations, but because it was a big deal and there's a lot of people on here, I made sure I have my microphone here, my Shure microphone that I use for my podcasting. And that's why I have my headset on, so I can hear it better, to make sure that it sounds okay. That's very important too. Is that pertinent to maybe a sales meeting where people? No. But if you know that you're going to be presenting in kind of this fashion, where people are coming and there's going to be a large group of people, you want to make sure that you give them every opportunity to be as clearly heard as you can be heard, making eye contact. You don't want to be too high or too low. Like, I don't want to be looking down at you. And so there's some of these techniques that work well. As it relates to, say, a sales presentation, you need to make sure there's somebody else here. So Tom, you were getting knocked off a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so Kathy's here. We have, and what I would suggest too is if somebody has administrative rights and you're presenting a deck let me say at a sales pitch, that you have a redundant deck, you have somebody else who is also able to share the screen, who also has the ability. So if you get knocked off, Tom, Kathy can continue that slide and you can continue the conversation, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm sure Tom's going to get back on in a minute, I don't know what happened, because that just kills it, right? So you're a team. You need to make sure that you're aligned from a content standpoint, but you also need to make sure you're aligned from a presentation standpoint. And the final thing I will say about this, and sometimes it's hard for people to understand, is this presentation is in service to your audience. So you're sitting here spending all this time making sure everything's perfect and every slide makes sense, and the whole, that whole thing. And you're making it all about you. You're saying, gosh, I hope remember we talked about I and me versus we, I have a great presentation today. It's not about me. I'm sitting here, I want to do my best. I hope this is great advice for everybody out there, but it is about the audience. Your presentation, whether it's at a sales meeting, whether it's an executive meeting, whatever it may be, whether it's a webinar in front of several hundred people, is in service to your audience. And don't ever forget that. That's a virtual tip, but that's also a presentation tip. And it's not meant to demean the presentation, because some people are like, it's not a performance, it's a presentation. It's very important. Yes, it is. But you are performing for the audience, and the audience, it's all about them and it's not about you. Please keep that in mind. And if we skip ahead here to a couple of others, and we mentioned this earlier, the gaining the advantage, I mentioned that, and this is a great way to sort of end it, is talking about the caffeine, the sleep, the meditation, the working out, all those sorts of things, because you want to put yourself in the right mindset to make sure that you, before you walk in that real or virtual room, that you are doing the best of your ability and that you've set yourself up for success. And two of the other components that I always add here are practice and visualization, but that it doesn't matter who you are, please practice. And if you're a visual person and it helps you see the success at the end and, I closed the deal, or I had a good outcome for my meeting, by all means do it. But practice is at the top of this list, and that is non-negotiable, no matter what kind of personality you have.
Well, Rob, we did have a lot of great questions that I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I did want to, ask one though, because this has happened to me, especially in the virtual rooms. When you don't get questions, you open it up to close your presentation out, and silence. What do you do in those situations?
Well, first of all, if it's something like this, if it's a presentation, if it's like a webinar or a bigger meeting, something like this, and I'm the host and we're all administrators and that sort of thing, I always like to have a planted question. And with a lot of my clients, you have a planted question because sometimes it is crickets. And sometimes, and not sometimes, almost all the time, getting the first question is the hardest part of everything. And once you get a question, then other questions follow. But please, have a plan. Now, if it's a presentation and there's no questions, that means you've answered all the questions they would have. So it depends on who the audience is. It depends on what the scenario is. So if it's something big like this and you go, gosh, nobody's asking any questions. Well, I hope Tom or Kathy, I hope you have a question for me that you thought of. And you actually didn't plant this question. It was an actual question that you had, which is even better, right, Kathy? So that's always my advice, because if you don't get that, then all of a sudden, like, somebody, I'm on, that first hand's always the hardest. And then you sit there and it's that time killer. So always have a plant or three.
Here's the piece of advice that we give, and I want to ask the question to you. Maybe it's really powerful, that place of okay, if there's no questions, tell me what's your biggest takeaway from today's presentation. Let me get 2 or 3 takeaways. And so, Rob, I'd love to ask you that in the audience. What is the top 2 or 3 takeaways that you think they should get from this presentation? What are those flags you wanted?
The flags for everybody that are here, that is here today, is, first of all, I want you to understand that preparation is key. That when you're doing it this way, that extra step or 2 is absolutely imperative. It requires more work, but you absolutely have to do it, because you don't have the benefit of being in the office with somebody, with, being able to walk in somebody's office and what are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to game this sort of thing? So preparation is key. Yeah. And the next 2 are related. It's message and audience. You can't tell everybody everything you know. You're a subject matter expert in your field. And somebody says, what do? You can't go on a 5-minute diatribe. You have to prioritize your messages. For this particular thing, what's the important thing I can convey today? So knowing your audience and having a very specific message that you want to convey on that day. If you all walk away with those things, preparation, messaging, and audience, then I've done my job today. And the rest of it is unique to virtual. I'm not saying the virtual pieces of this discussion aren't important. They're very important. But it all starts with those 3 things. And then there are things specific to this method of communication.
Well, thank you so much. I can't believe this hour went.
I can't believe. I'm like, this is an hour? This is an hour?
It really did go fast.
Bye.
There were a number of questions we didn't get to. We did have your email address and your LinkedIn. Yeah. We wanted to remind the audience that they can reach out to you if they want to get a one-on-one answer to any of the questions we didn't get to. So please put BAU or business as unusual in your subject line, so Rob knows that you're coming from our webinar series. I always want to make sure we don't, we have an opportunity to thank our sponsors. So we've got 3 really great sponsors: M3, Tom's company, Insperity, and HR Source. And then what's next? What's coming next? Our July business as unusual is going to be driving versus drowning, choosing the smart tech platforms to fuel your growth. So we're going to talk about, the business technology stack and what should be in it. Or, some organizations have too much technology. Some organizations don't have enough. So, what is the right recipe for your tech roadmap? And so it's going to be a really engaging conversation with Mike Remke and Matt Butler from Bonsai Data Solutions. I'm really excited about talking about this topic because it's mission critical for almost every organization. Again, thank you to my co-host Tom and our guest Rob.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
And saying goodbye to everyone today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in July.